Hi, my students. I hope you are well and safe. Learning continues. My name is Aris Guju from the School of Education, Mount Kenya University, and the unit code is BEM 4101, Introduction to Environmental Education. Just to remind you of what we covered in our previous lesson, we were still covering on population and environment, which is a very wide area, and we had been able to look at certain key terms and concepts in relation to population, sex ratio, birth and death rate, population age, and we had also looked at other key terms that we need to understand so that we can fully conceptualize the issue of population and environment. We were also able to look at the causes of high population growth rate. As we said in our last session, population increase is such a worldwide thing, and world over, the population has grown to such an alarming rate. Some of the factors we contributed to include immigration, child labor, better use of contraceptives, and the like. And we said, because of all these factors coupled together, the population has greatly increased. And over the past 40 years, population has really doubled. And when the population doubles and increases, this has some impact on the environment. And we said there is a very close relationship between population and the environment. In our previous discussion, we were able to look at certain population dynamics, and we said that these actually affect how people move from one area to another. We focused on the population transition theory, and we were able to understand the concept of population change in various stages. And we said we will focus now on population migration, but our basic emphasis today will be to look at how population impacts on rural and urban environment. But before we move to that, we look at patterns of population migration. And there are basically four migration patterns. We have rural-urban migration. When we talk about rural-urban migration, we are talking of people moving from rural areas to urban areas, basically because of certain factors like need for employment, whereby in the rural areas there is no employment, and people seek employment in the urban areas where there are industries and where there are job opportunities. Better social amenities will also make people to move from the rural areas to the urban areas. And they believe that life in urban areas is better, and this makes people to move to those urban areas. And when people move in the urban areas, this will create an influx in the urban areas, and it will have some impact, which we shall discuss later. We also have what we call the rural to rural migration. This is where people in the same rural setup, they move from one area, go to another area, maybe because there is a job opportunity in terms of casual labor that emerges in another area. Maybe there is insecurity in one rural setup, and they decided to go to another rural setup. There are also people who are nomadic pastoralists, and where there is no food for their animals, they tend to move from one rural setup to another rural setup. That is what we call rural to rural migration, though this is not very, very common. The other type of migration pattern, we call it urban to urban migration. This is where people in urban centers will move from one area, urban area, to go to another urban area. This is normally necessitated by office employment or business opportunities and commerce, where people feel that maybe they are able to do business better in one area of the urban population, and they go to another area. So this is very common in urban areas. The last type of migration pattern, we call it urban to rural migration. This is where people will move from the urban areas, from the towns and the cities, and they decide to go back to the rural areas. Basically, this is not a very common phenomena, but because of people retiring from their normal jobs when they reach the age of retirement, particularly like in Kenya, you realize those old people who have retired, they opt to go back to the rural areas where they can enjoy their peace and they can enjoy their pension at peace. So retirees will move from urban areas to rural areas. We also find that people in casual employment, when the employment is over, particularly in an industry, they tend to go back to the rural area, and therefore they settle there. So those population migrations will tell us a lot that population will keep changing. And going back to the population transition theory and the various stages that we saw, you realize that population cannot be static. People will keep on moving from one area to another, either from rural to urban areas, from rural to rural areas, or from urban to rural migration. However, our concern today, we want to look at population, rapid population growth rate on rural and urban environments. And before I look into that, it is very important for us to understand that there is a complex relationship between population and environment. And we realize that as the population continues to grow, particularly in the urban areas, the rural areas are not left out. And when we are looking at the impact of population increase, we realize that the impact in rural areas and the impact in urban areas can be seen differently. And that is what we are going to look at today. One of the things that is very important for you to realize as we start off this topic today is that population and environment cannot be separated. When the population increases, like it has doubled in the last 40 years, world over, there is an impact. When the population increases, there is need to feed the ever-growing population. This population that need to be fed will demand for more agricultural land so that there can be more productivity. The need to grow more crops will mean that there will be overstocking, there will be overcultivation, and this will have some negative impact on the environment. This is what has caused things like deforestation. Deforestation has aggravated into desertification, and we realize that because of all these changes, the world over, things have changed, and we are experiencing very many changes in our environment. Even we talk about global warming because of the changes in hydrological cycles. So population and environment, my dear students, this is what I want you to get. You cannot separate them. And this complex relationship goes into the rural and into the urban areas. For today, we shall focus more on the impact of rapid population growth both in the rural areas and in urban environments. And I want us, first of all, to understand rural environments. When we talk about rural environment, we are talking about areas where we do not have large cities or towns. Majority of the people settling in the rural areas, they are farmers, either keeping animals or cultivating crops. They do their businesses normally in the rural setup, and they normally don't have a lot of issues. But the population in the rural areas, as we have said, is also bound to increase, particularly when people want to move from one rural area to another area. There has been increased mortality rate. At the same time, we realize that better health facilities, better nutrition has also aggravated population increase in the rural areas. Poverty has also been one factor that has caused population increase in the rural areas. Majority of the poor, the rural folks, they are poor, they have no economic activity, so most of the time, they are idle. And this actually attributes to high population growth rate. And when this high population growth rate is experienced in the rural areas, there are certain impacts that are bound to be witnessed. We look at some of them. And the first one is land subdivision. You realize that when population increases in the rural areas, the land is not enough, and the carrying capacity of the land will not be able to accommodate all those people who have been born. And the increase in population, therefore, will lead to land subdivision. Land subdivision will lead to a lot of land fragmentation, where people will divide the land, and this land may not be economical in the far end. Some people, it is not a wonder, they may become landless. When there are so many people in the rural area, there is a lot of pressure exerted on land as a natural resource, and this creates a big problem. The other one is that there will be overcultivation and overgrazing. Remember, people in the rural area, their main economic activity is either farming or livestock keeping. And this will be another impact that will be witnessed when there is high population in the rural areas. And when there is overcultivation and overgrazing, again, this will lead to soil degradation. The soil will not be able to take care of the crops, the animals that are overstocked, and ultimately this will resort to soil erosion. And with soil erosion, we are then talking about poor productivity in the agricultural land. When there is poor productivity, definitely this may lead even to famine. And it is not uncommon here in Kenya to find even rural people lacking food, and even government providing food for them. This is as a result of what we are talking about today. When the land is not enough in the rural areas, the other chance is that people may tend to encroach forests. It is not uncommon to hear of people going to the forested areas which are gazetted as forest areas. They go there to farm, and we see them being chased by the government. But it is because they do not have enough land in the rural areas. So what will happen is that when they encroach the forests, they are interfering with wildlife resource. And we find that the animals also feel threatened. And this is one of the conflict between human beings and the wildlife, because people are encroaching their habitat. The other one is that this may also resort to deforestation. They clear the forest to create land for more farming, and this eventually leads to deforestation. And of course, when they clear the forest, they get wood, they get timber, or even land for settlement. What is the implication of this? The implication of deforestation is that this will also affect the rain pattern. They even interfere with the catchment areas. They indiscriminately cut down trees, and this is not in order. So what this will happen, it may also actually lead to loss of biodiversity. Some species of very important plants and even trees will be cut down. This will also interfere with wildlife. Some of the animals might decide to run away, and this has happened in Kenya, and we have heard the government talk about it. When there is pressure, population pressure in the rural areas, we also have indiscriminate fishing, particularly in those areas where fishing is the main economic activity. Take the case of Lake Victoria. Those farmers, those people there in the rural area, their main activity is fishing. So they do overfishing, and this has its own impact on these rural areas. The depression of fish as a resource. At times we even hear the government closing the fisheries and all that. The other one is over-extraction of mineral resources, where people are doing mining as their only economic activity. They overstretch on the mineral resources, and this will lead to a lot of waste, watershed burst, and waste of available land. Again, when there is over-mining, this one will also affect the aesthetic value of the environment. When people mine, they leave those holes, the holes collect water, the value, the aesthetic, the beauty of the environment is interfered with. And we can't forget about encroachment into conservation areas. We have conservancies. And when there is population in these rural areas, these people will go anywhere where they can settle. So regardless of whether the areas are conservation areas and they are gazetted, people will tend to go there. Some of them go there and even refuse to get out of there. We have the case of some of our communities in Kenya who actually go and encroach themselves in conservation areas, and they don't move either, even when they are given pressure to move out of those conservation areas. And this generally interferes with the environment. In totality, what we are saying is that when there is rapid population in the rural areas, there is change in lifestyle. And this will impact heavily on the resources, particularly those in the rural areas. And like we are saying, business will not be as usual. The living standards will not be as the same. And this change in lifestyle will greatly impact on the environment. So what we are saying here is that as many people may not imagine that high population will impact on the rural areas, this effect is felt. And this will cause an imbalance, what we call resource imbalance, because we tend to overutilize our resources like land, like air, like water, leading to pollution and many other negative impacts. So we cannot ignore the impact of rapid population growth in our rural areas. Then now we look at population growth in the urban areas. Many of us, I believe my students, you live in urban areas, and you are well aware of the impact that high population growth rate will bring into the urban areas. When I'm talking about urban areas, remember I'm talking about the big cities, like in our case we have Nairobi, we have Mombasa, we have other big towns, and we are also talking of other small towns which have grown as a result of the process of urbanization. If you take the case of our Thika town, Thika was a very tiny town the other day, but now because of the process of urbanization, the town has really grown. And you realize that this growth of population in urban areas, it has also its own share of environmental impact. So let us focus on the impact of population growth in urban areas. These ones include, one, inadequate housing. When we have high population in urban areas, it is definite that the number of houses will not be able to cater for this high population. Many people will not have enough houses. The infrastructure also will not be enough. Name even water, it will not be enough. And what this will resort into, it will resort into crowded areas in the urban areas. If you look at Nairobi today, Nairobi has grown into such a large city. I want to imagine that when the planners were planning for Nairobi, they had not anticipated that in the near future, the population will grow to the way that it is today. And this has caused a lot of pressure on housing. Many people, particularly those who have migrated from the rural areas to the urban areas, they are not able to afford good housing. The houses are not even either enough, creating overcrowding. What happens when people are crowded in the urban areas? This will result to creation of slums and ghettos. This is not an uncommon phenomena. In Kenya, we have slums like Mukuru. We also have Kebela and many others. It is not that these people don't want to live in good houses. The issue is they are not able to afford good housing in the cities. Some of them just came from the rural areas and came to look for jobs, and they cannot afford good houses. This creates a lot of pressure. When we have slums, I want you to note that these effects follow each other. Creation of slums will lead to lack of clean drinking water. Water is a very important resource. We need fresh water for drinking. But because of pressure, even on water, we even experience what we call water rationing. I think even here in Thika at times we experience water rationing. Not because of the pipes breaking down, but because the water that we have in our reservoirs is not able to reach to every other person because we are too many. So this leads to lack of drinking, clean drinking water, and this impacts heavily on our health. When we don't take good water or fresh water, this brings diseases like cholera, typhoid, and many others. So the healthy standards in the urban areas will also go down because of high population in these particular areas. Again, because of pressure on the existing resources in the urban areas, including houses, there is poor drainage and sanitation. I want to draw your attention, like when there is a lot of rain, you may realize that our drainage is not good. The sanitation is not good. We have even poor waste disposal, whether it is in low form or whether it is in terms of waste disposal, because we realize that what we have in terms of housing is not able to cater for this. So high population will definitely bring about poor drainage and poor sanitation, resulting to problem of solid waste disposal, poor garbage collection, and this poor garbage collection will in turn also impact on bad health, and therefore this becomes a very big issue. This is not a new problem. It is there. It is common in most of our urban areas in Kenya, particularly in our big cities like Nairobi, in our big cities like Kisumu and Mombasa. This one is very rampant. And when the town continues growing like the way Thika town is growing, we are bound to also experience this problem. The other major problem that comes with rapid population in urban areas is traffic congestion. Many people are driving their own cars. This brings about traffic congestion. We see a lot of jams in our major roads, the matatus and all that. There is a lot of congestion, and this traffic congestion will in turn bring about air pollution. It will also bring about loss of variable time. You are going to work, you take more time than you are expected. This decreases the manpower hours, the hours you're supposed to work because you got late in the jam. So in itself, it also has an impact on the economy at large, because when people spend a lot of time in jam because of traffic congestion, this will negate on our economic productivity. Again, traffic congestion, because of the many cars on the road, the vehicles and all that, it will also bring about emission of funny fumes, and this results to air pollution. It will also increase noise pollution because of the vehicles and all that. Apart from this, it will also have water pollution because of poor drainage and sanitation. And when we take this water, there will be a problem again on our health. Airborne diseases, waterborne diseases, they are likely to affect us. High levels of unemployment. Everybody comes to the urban areas expecting to get good jobs. But when they come, they realize that the jobs are not forthcoming. So this will create high level of unemployment. And those who get employed, they are either employed in industries as casual laborers. And what happens is that they get disappointed because the jobs are not there. And everybody wants a good job, which is not available. This will in turn resort to prostitution and other social evils like crime and insecurity. When you don't get a job, you need to feed your children, you need money, people will resort to these social evils. Prostitution, which is very common nowadays. Crime, they can't get jobs, so they resort into crimes, robbery and all that. And it also leads to insecurity. You cannot be secure. There is a lot of insecurity in most of our urban areas. We hear of cases of violence, robbery with violence. And this has also contributed to urban-rural migration, where people feel insecure in the urban areas and they tend now to go again to the rural areas where they feel they are a bit safe. Again, when we have high population in the urban areas, this will bring about uncontrolled urban development. I think this is very true in Kenya. We have uncontrolled urban development, much as there is what we call the environmental impact assessment that we talked about, where you need to assess the level of development vis-a-vis the effects that will have on the environment. They are still uncontrolled urban buildings, urban development. You realize slums are coming up. Houses that are not well structured are coming up. And we have had even cases whereby houses are falling. It is because of this problem. Some of them are not properly built. And some of them, they cannot hold the population that is there. And this becomes a big problem. In Kenya today, we are having uncontrolled urban development, and that is why most of our cities are overcrowded. The resources that are there in terms of water, they are not enough. Air is not enough to breathe. And you realize that this, again, aggravates the problem of pollution. And this, in turn, leads to diseases because you cannot get clean water, you cannot get good air, and therefore this will resort to a lot of health issues. The last one is loss of open space or parks. We need to have this, whereby we have open spaces for parks, whereby we have open spaces where people can have recreation facilities, like the way we have Uhuru Park. I want to imagine that if Uhuru Park was not well controlled, people would still go there and settle there. It is not uncommon to hear that people have grabbed open spaces and they have built either development projects or they have built houses there. This is the problem of high population in the urban areas. And looking at all of them, you will appreciate one thing, that we cannot ignore the kind of relationship that exists between population and environment. All these impacts, both in the rural and in the urban areas, they impact heavily on our environment. And because of that, it is very important, as I've been telling you, environmental education deals with giving us knowledge that we can be able to use so that we can mitigate against this. Because of this raises a very fundamental issue on population control. Because of the high population, we need to think about controlling our population. And there are various approaches that have been used to control human population, whether it is in the urban area or in the rural area. And this is part of government policy, not only in Kenya, even world over. All the governments are trying to control their population so that they can avert those effects that we have already talked about. And the aim of controlling the population is to ensure that our environment, our natural environment, our ecosystem is able to carry the right number of people, and we are able to enjoy the natural resources that God has given us. Failure to which, if you don't control the population, this may finally lead to an environmental impoverishment or environmental degradation. So these approaches, they have worked in some countries, and in Kenya, we have also applied them. One of them is the issue of disincentives, whereby you put high taxes on for families with excess children. I think this in Kenya, it has not worked. But in some countries of the world, it has worked. Instead of giving incentives, in some countries, people are given incentives to give back. But in others, you cut down on those incentives, create high taxes for families with excess children so that they feel and then they stop producing more children. This has worked in some countries. The other one is law and fines, especially where the government decides the number of children a family can have. This is very relevant in China. In China, there is a policy of one child. So if you exceed that, the law will follow you up. And the Chinese people, they are very particular about this. How I pray that this can come to Kenya. But again, I don't know the impact of this in our future generations, where we are only giving birth to 1 or 2 children. Our great-grandfathers are crying, but this is another approach that has been used. It has worked in China, and I believe it can work elsewhere. The other one is cost sharing, whereby instead of the government giving all the services, then they introduce the cost sharing policy, whereby people also pay for some of the fundamental services. For instance, in Kenya, we are given free education. But if the population continues escalating, the government may not be able to provide free education. So people will be forced to cost share with the government so that education and health and other facilities are given. The other approach is shortening maternity to discourage births. In Kenya, instead of shortening, I think we are increasing and even giving the fathers what we are calling paternity leave. But in some countries, you are given a very short period of maternity leave. In Kenya, we are given 3 months, but in other countries, they are reducing that so that people do not continue giving birth. That is a way or a method of discouraging people to give birth to more children. Remember when we looked at natality rate and fertility rate and the sex ratios and distribution, we were able to look at the impact that these population dynamics have on population control. However, as we think about controlling the population, I would want to say that there are challenges that are likely to be faced. When we talk about having laws and fines, a policy of one child, we have other issues that will come and they will contradict that. For instance, the issue of population control being very controversial and being very subjective, trying to keep the population growth at low levels, it will face a number of challenges. The first one, culture and traditions. We have people who believe that they must give birth so long as they are able to give birth. They have no issue. And now we are going back to that in some of our African communities. We are worried that you young generation, you are only giving birth to 1 or 2. Our great-grandmothers and fathers, they are telling us, give birth to more. The culture will dictate how many children you'll give. If you come from a culture where they believe you must give birth, you give birth. There is also the naming system, whereby some people feel that I have to name a child after my father. So if I'm only getting girls, I continue giving birth until I give birth to a boy. And this has happened. And it has really made many people to give birth to many, many children whom they never thought they would give birth to, trying just to get a boy or trying to get a certain kind of sex of the baby, which will actually be accepted by your culture. So culture and traditions may also take us back when it comes to the issue of population control. And no, by nature, Africans are very cultural, and they abide to their culture and their traditions. So when it comes to giving birth, I think this may be an uphill task, telling people just give birth to 1 or 2. The second one is resistance to new ideas. Population control will come with new things, new technologies, particularly contraceptives, and many people are resistant to change. Many people don't want new ideas. They will not take them up. They know to do things how they have always done them, so they will resist any new method of population control. The other one is attitude to family planning. In Kenya, we have done this. It has worked successfully in some areas, but we still have the problem of attitude, where some people particularly feel like family planning is not godly. We have the case of the Catholic Church that says that you have only to do natural family planning. And when this is the case, then you realize that much as the government would want to do that, you realize that people will not do that. And this attitude has made many people not to be able to control their families. The fear of being unable to have children, this is also an issue. Religion is a big hindrance to population control. Some religions are against family planning, the Catholic, the Muslim, and they will say that artificial family planning is not good for them. So what we are saying this. Much as we would want to change the population, there are contemporary issues that require to be checked into. There are certain challenges that will come forth, and the government must be ready to change its policy and also do something in educating and creating awareness on population control, because we have a lot of illiteracy, a lot of ignorance, and the awareness strategies that must be we must put in place and implement. We must be careful that the government is supporting them. That comes, we come to the end of our lesson today. We have been able to look at the impact of population on both rural and urban environment, the strategies used, and the challenges. I would wish that you go and read deeper and try to apply what we have learned in our Kenyan case and think more on what can be done to control population. Thank you very much. Keep reading, keep safe. Thank you.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.